Awake on your beds, be still. Offer that, for it is fitting. Trust it, for it is the rightness of all that is. People say, who will bring us what we need? Who will beam heaven's light on us? But already my heart has more joy than full granaries and wineries could provide. And I will lie down to sleep with a deep peace, for in you I find my completeness, my completion. Amen. And so it is.
Amen. Thank you, Reverend Phyllis, for centering us in this psalm as we begin our evening together. I am very excited to introduce our presenter. Dr. Patricia Bratt is a psychoanalyst and psychotherapist practicing in Livingston, New Jersey and New York City. She's the director of the Academy of Clinical and Applied Psychoanalysis, a comprehensive mental health training and treatment resource, and its partner, the Institute of Counseling and Psychoanalytic Studies, which offers a regionally accredited master's degree in clinical mental health counseling. Dr. Bratt developed ACAP's Trauma and Resilience Studies program and the I Strive Center, a weekend program for young adults on the autism spectrum. She has served as a frontline mental health specialist in disaster situations, domestic violence, and family court, as well as clinical and academic settings. She is a consultant on TV and news media. Her recent book is entitled Mutual Growth in Psychotherapeutic Relationship. Dr. Bratt, we are so grateful for your presence with us tonight. Thank you for sharing with us this evening.
Thank you, Reverend John. I wanted to start by saying welcome to everybody, and thank you to all of the committee who has made this possible, Reverends John and Anne, Ellen Francoise, and of course, Matthew. I understand that you've had some good weeks in the past month, and I'm very happy to be with you tonight. I first apologize to Reverend John. I am, the name of our school is the Academy of Clinical and Applied Psychoanalysis. And we spent about 10 years trying to figure out a new name. The original name was the Psychoanalytic Center of Northern New Jersey, and we wanted to get it shorter. This was so long ago, we were trying to get an A beginning so that it would be listed first alphabetically. So it's fairly pre-tech. Spent 10 years and came up with this Academy of Clinical and Applied Psychoanalysis, which was even longer than the first one. And I feel so bad when somebody has to read it, or my book, the words, they're too hard. We have to learn how to, that's why we abbreviated our logos to just ACAP, so we wouldn't have to go through, people wouldn't have to go through all that. And I see even offering an MA in clinical mental health counseling, certificate in psychoanalytic studies, all too many words and too many syllables. But thank you for that kind introduction, Reverend John. Reverend Ann told me, we're here to talk about resilience mainly, and a little bit about trauma. And when I was talking with Reverend Ann about what I might say, we said this is a group who wants to know about resilience. They don't really want to know an academic, have an academic presentation. And it reminded me of something. And I have 4 sisters, and one of my sisters, who I'm very close with, years ago, I said to her, I was working so hard on an article that I did not want it to, I think it was an article, to not sound too academic and esoteric, just want to be in ordinary language. And I really worked on it. And this sister is a musician, and the orchestra travels all over the world. I said, would you read this for me and just tell me what you think? So she read it and she said, this is perfect. It is exactly what I need to take on those long flights when I can't get to sleep. So she said, I told her that today. She said, I never heard that story. But I said, I worked so hard to make it not sound over, psychobabble. And she said, well, and she gave it back to me. So I hope that tonight I can achieve that, because we tend to fall into a language that we're used to. And I'm, especially when presenting, um, I think that I probably go toward that. I would really love to just be in a dialogue with all of you, but I know you're here for something. So uh, let's start. Matthew, would you move to slide 2? Okay, and I'm going to move this over here. So just a little bit about stress and trauma, because some of you I recognize from the first meeting where Mary Massaro presented, and I talked about some of this then, but I thought it important to review it a little bit, because we're looking at what's the relationship between both trauma and resilience and ordinary development and resilience. So what is traumatic stress? Even with that statement, I see that I'm already differentiating something. There is a difference between a traumatic experience, the response of traumatic stress to stress, and a post-traumatic stress disorder, a disorder. So most people, when exposed to traumatic stress, don't develop a clinical disorder. Some do, and there are reasons for that. But I want to um, emphasize that because many people think that if you're exposed to trauma, you have developed this disorder, and it's not true. We're exposed to stress all the time, and we tend to recover. So traumatic stress has many faces, but usually it is something that is experienced when it's traumatic stress as life-threatening. The person feels ill-equipped or unequipped to manage it. They feel like they can't do anything to prevent it. It happens to them. And the response is typically the reflex response is fight, flight, freeze, and there is a fourth one now. It's called fawn, and that's connected to, many of you may know about like Stockholm syndrome, for example, where a person is kidnapped. And actually, I had a call this morning. I'll talk about it briefly about a couple of cases throughout the presentation, and I'm watching the time. So this morning I had a call from a therapist who had an initial, everything we're doing is virtual now because of COVID. So the therapist called, she was very concerned. She's a new therapist, and she had an initial contact with a patient who was hysterical. She was crying, frantic. She said she lives in Newark, I think it was in Newark, with her little boy, and she has a husband or boyfriend who says terrible things to her. This is what she was reporting, that he calls her names. He says that she's stupid. She's ruined his life. Apparently, she lives in a small portion of his house. And one of the things that triggered it this week is that because she's such a difficult person, he's going away for the weekend with another woman. And she had many complaints about him. So the person, the supervisee who called me, didn't know if this was a situation of domestic violence. That was her concern. And she had asked the caller, are you safe? And the person said, he's at work, so I'm safe. But that didn't tell, the therapist about when he's not at work, how is it? And she went on to say that she's saving up money so that she can get out of there. Meanwhile, she has a job that's very low paying. He makes a lot more money. And in my hearing, I hear she has no family to turn to. She has to get out of there because of the abuse she's describing. But what she was asking is, he keeps telling me I'm crazy. He says that there's something wrong with me, and I need to know, am I crazy? Am I a bad person? This is an example of what could be the fawning response to trauma, where you are so beaten down and contained that you start to believe and ally with the predator, as you are the victim and they are the predator. So this new therapist did exactly the right thing. Hopefully it will work out, but I'm reminded that that's similar to the Stockholm syndrome, but being captured in a way where somebody looking in from the outside would think you could just walk out, but the person feels they cannot, because they feel they've been so intimidated and brainwashed that they experience themselves as incapable. So Matthew, would you switch to the next slide? This is a riddle. It's a riddle of a lot of young children. And throughout this, I'm going to give you some examples of what are easy for children and not so easy for adults. And one of the reasons that I bring this up is because to be resilient, you need to be flexible, be able to look at things from different perspectives. And children do this much more easily than adults. So if you look at this and see what happened in 1961 and will not happen again until 6009. If somebody knows, you can put it in the chat. What happened in 1961 and will not happen again until 6009. Anybody who knows that, put it in the chat. Children get it right away. Okay. Ellen, you said something? Okay. I don't see anything in the chat. So what happens in 1961, that won't happen again until 69, is that if you flip the numbers upside down, they say the same thing, upside down, backwards. You see that? When you flip it around, it'll say the same thing as the other. Children see that right away. As adults, we've become so preoccupied. We have so many things going on in our minds that it stymies us, in a sense, from being flexible and looking at things from different perspectives. Matthew, would you go to the next? So what we're going to think about is what makes some people more vulnerable to stress reactions. And here's Charlie Brown, one of my favorites. And you see him there. If you're going to get anything out of joy, out of being depressed, you've got to stand like this. So what does that mean? Here's Charlie. He's looking to get joy out of being depressed. He's demonstrating what you have to do. But this is an example of what makes somebody resilient. Which we'll look at in a minute. But people who are resilient can find ways in difficult, overwhelming experiences to change it, to make it into something that has some other meaning. So that's what we're going to see as we go on. Next, Matthew. So who is most vulnerable to serious traumatic stress reactions. People who are most vulnerable are those who've had previous traumatic life events, people who are at risk because of recent ill health, people who experience severe stress and loss, have a diminished level of accessibility to social and emotional support, and lack effective coping skills and adequate defense mechanisms. So if you think about the woman, the caller who I mentioned earlier, we could see that she may not have some of these adaptive skills, right? It doesn't sound like, for example, that she has access to adequate social and emotional support. She's experienced, according to what she had said, a lot of stress and loss. Uh, she's had continuous trauma in her life. So it's very hard for that person to weather a stressful, overwhelming situation more so than the next person who hasn't had these types of events in their life. But because somebody is vulnerable to serious trauma does not mean they cannot recover or that we can't find ways to, to help them and ways to become more resilient. Next one. Another Charlie Brown. Sometimes I feel that life has passed me by, and Linus sighs. Did you ever feel that way, Charlie Brown? He said, no. I feel it's knocked me down and walked all over me. And I think that is how a lot of us feel this year. That the life that we knew has been trampled, and often we don't give enough credence to how difficult the overwhelming experiences of everyday life are. Some of us in this past year have gone through terrible losses and deprivation and injury. And many of us, most of us, have also had everyday things that are changed. We could be mourning the loss of our life that we knew in 2019, or the things that frightened us all through this year. Did we have to wash the vegetables? Could we get food? How can we be alone in our, isolated? There's so many things that are the fabric of everyday life that constitute losses to which we need to respond with some types of resilience. When we think of stress or situations as being these more major catastrophic events, but it would be very helpful to understand that when we feel like today, people were saying, I don't know, I feel like I'm just dragging. Well, this is an anniversary week. It's the anniversary of when things closed down in our pandemic. And our psyches respond to anniversaries. It's also a time now this week, spring is starting this weekend, allegedly, and the weather has somewhat shifted. So you can have a feeling of, wow, this is, we've got more daylight. This is great. But also, it's a reminder that we've just gone through a whole year and we thought we'd be out of this. And now the season changing reminds us we're in another year, another cycle of this, even though there are many things I'm not talking about that are positive, the vaccines and more understanding of the COVID, and many things have changed. But I want to make it clear that we need to be easier on ourselves often. People think I shouldn't say anything because Jean has had such terrible trouble. All of these things have happened to her. this year, for example, and I'm okay. So what have I got to complain about? Well, we probably have a lot to complain about that are smaller, but that are corrosive and keep on adding to that lower level feeling of it's just not right, or I should, we say I shouldn't feel bad that I feel lonely, but if that's the right feeling, if you're alone and can't go out and can't do your life, even with the wonderful um, technology that we have with Zoom, your life has changed and we need to recognize that. And by recognizing that, we give ourselves the opportunity to do more problem solving as well as self care, but to find ways to find more meaning in the things that we're doing. That's how we build our, if you want to think of it this way, resilience system. Next, Matthew. Thank you. So Thomas Edison said, I haven't failed. I've identified 10,000 ways this doesn't work. So Thomas Edison, for everything else about him, was a very resilient man, as was Albert Einstein, who suffered greatly as a kid and was bullied and marginalized and taunted. And these people figured out ways to look at things from different perspectives. That is the greatest skill that we can bring to ourselves in order to build resilience, is to be able to step back and look at things from a different perspective or from many different perspectives, instead of what we tend to do is have a very all or nothing, black or white view of things. Next one, Matthew. You have a different one than I. What's your number 8, Matthew?
One sec. I'm just gonna.
It's the one right before
I'm
that.
just gonna open up the.
I can just say that you don't have to do it.
All right.
The slides.
Is this one okay?
No, that's afterwards.
Um,
It's one that says emotional resilience at the top.
I'm just gonna reopen the slides from your.
Sure.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. It's great. I get to see everybody at once. It's much better. I so much rather be looking at you all. And of course, the slide that went haywire is the one that describes what's emotional resilience. So it couldn't have picked a better one for it to become autonomous, I guess. So
Dr. Brett, did that slide say that emotional resilience is the capacity not just to survive, but that to use it as a growth opportunity? Or was it?
Emotional resilience is the ability to recover from or adjust easily to stress, misfortune, or change, and to assess situations from a variety of perspectives that will allow creative problem solving.
Is this the correct slide?
Matthew, go back one slide.
Mm-hmm.
There you go.
Perfect.
Yeah. So yeah. Oh, and it's got different fonts. So emotional resilience, it's the capacity to recover, weather easily or more easily stress, misfortune, or change, and to be able to assess. This is a very important aspect of resilience, to be able to assess situations from a variety of perspectives that allow creative problem solving. It's the capacity not just to survive, but to use the experience as a growth opportunity. So one of the things that I wanted to mention is that in the field of resilience studies, and I've been studying and talking about resilience for about 20 years now, there has been, and it's growing. Before 30 years ago, there really wasn't any study of this concept. But initially, it was thought that resilience is something that is a fixed state. You're born resilient uh, or not, and that you can't, you can maybe a little bit build on it, but if you're not born that way, you will not ever be able to be truly resilient. As the studies expanded and evolved over the years, it became clear that, as we know about with neuroscience, that the brain is able to generate new nerves, that that resilience is something that can be built. You may come with a constitutional predisposition for resilience, but what happens is you live in an environment that impacts this constitution. So even if you don't come from a genetically resilient stock, you have an environment, and then on top of that, you have life experiences. So you have your initial family environment, and then you have life experiences. And as people were studying this concept of resilience, one of the things that they studied was, how is it that some people in really chronically, what we would think of as chronically traumatic situations, life situations, develop and flourish, and some don't. And some people who are in what we would think is supportive life situations, they don't. So this study of resilience evolved to consider that. And what was found was that among the things that are critically important is that in early childhood, those who develop more resilience traits later in life have had one or two people who were very close and supportive of them, not necessarily parents. So it is one of the things that was found over and over among people who later were able to adapt more easily to stressful situations, that they had this foundation of social emotional resources. And being able to access social emotional resources as an adult is one of the most important things that help us to recover from stressful situations. So, like the woman, the caller I mentioned, who called the therapist today, it sounds like she doesn't have access to those types of resources in her life. The resources in her life are negative, but something has helped her to reach out and make a call. And what I understand is that she actually called several agencies to see where there was an opening that she could get to somebody. So there's something in there that demonstrates that there was somebody, there were people who helped her along the way to feel validated and to feel that she had some inner capacity. And that's what part of the role in healthy development is, being able to feel reliant on some socio-emotional resources, some in your environment, able to rely on it because it helps to center you. People who are very resilient in life, if you're thinking of healthy development, you see them, they're people who are great problem solvers. They are they don't feel uncomfortable by failure. They may not like it, but they know, okay, as I said with Thomas Edison, so it isn't that I failed, I just found 10,000 ways what I'm doing doesn't work. On to 10,001, So is that the capacity to persist and persevere in the face of what feels like it's an overwhelming problem. I see there's a typo on that. Okay, there's no L. It's funny because there is an L on mine. Must have been an original. Matthew, can you go to the next now? Which I think is the one. Right, so from a mindful perspective, that's what we're saying. One's response to a particular situation is not an attempt to make the best choice, but to make a choice from among options, to create options, right? And that's, this poor woman is going to be my example for tonight. That here she was calling different places to find out where can she go to get the help that she needs to just be able to talk and help her get enough courage to leave that situation. You can move to the next one, Matthew. So this is an example of kids. I work with a lot of children, but these children were in a family situation where it was enormous fighting, constant fighting and bickering. And one of the worst kinds of stressors is where it's intermittent and you don't know when something is going to happen. So you're always on guard. You're always waiting for the shoe to drop. And that's what was happening in these kids at home. So they came up with an idea of having a contract with their parents, because the parents are always telling them what to do. But in this case, the kids thought, well, how could we do it different? They came up with this contract that they presented to their parents. Us girls will make promises now. We'll promise to follow our obligations. They were about 11 years old. The laundry will be achieved every day after school for 2 weeks. We will attempt to compose breakfast every morning for 7 days. We will wipe Brian's butts for a day. This will also lead to getting our television privileges back, and will also lead to a meeting with Dr. Bratt, and Donna and myself will be there to tell her that your behavior has been atrocious. And that will also lead to you guys paying for it, not us. Sincerely, and their 2 names. So they found a way to join together, to collaborate, to make a stated position, to write it out, rather than the type of acting out that they had been doing, right? And for which they were losing every privilege possible. But they were in their acting out, they were reflecting what was going on between the parents. So the parents were fighting and acting out. The kids, they were modeling for the children followed that. And then through talking with me, they came up with this proposal that really, as you see, included what the parents wanted them to do, would give them back their privileges, but would bring the parents in as another part of the unit to discuss what's happening. And that is what happened. It was what happened. And they were terrific. So Matthew, the next one, please. What are traits of resilient individuals? Well, they can view problems and challenges as opportunities. I guess that's what you could say that those girls were doing, that they saw the problems and they figured out a way to turn it into an opportunity to get their privileges back, as well as to get their parents to come in and participate in the therapy. Resilient people succeed despite hardships. They have realistic goals and expectations. So that's one of the things that I was just talking about with us in this time of pandemic, and how hard many of us are on ourselves, thinking that we shouldn't feel this way. We're not entitled to complain because we're okay and other people are suffering. Well, that's not realistic, and it interferes with our ability to adapt, because we need to be able to have all of our feelings and welcome the feelings and know it's okay. It's okay if I if I can't stand it, that I can't go to the movies, and that's something that I feel, that's a deprivation. I can watch plenty of things, but I really love going to the movies. I don't know if I'll ever go to another movie. So is that a loss? But that's such a small thing. Can't complain about that. And we're hard on ourselves that way. Uh, and we really need to be able to be kinder to ourselves and to have realistic expectations and care about the welfare of others. In some research that I did, I interviewed a lot of therapists, and I'll talk about it in a second, but a lot of mental health professionals, not just therapists. But one of the traits, not so surprising, that one of the highest level coping skills that they all demonstrated was a sense of healthy altruism, which sounds like, oh, yeah, of course, mental health professionals, educators, they want to do things for other people. But healthy altruism is really treating somebody else the way that you would like to be treated in the same type of situation without any expectation that you'll get anything, that you won't get something in return. So to care about the welfare of others, we need to be curious. We need to be mindful of how we would like to be treated in that situation, and to do it out of the feeling that we want to do it because we care about the people in our world, in our community, not what we are necessarily going to get back from it. So resilient people seek out new and challenging experiences because they don't let anxiety and doubts overwhelm them. They don't feel ashamed in the face of failure. They know, look what I said to my sister. Now when I think about it, she said, what did she say? Oh yeah, this is an article I'd love to take on the plane so I can go to sleep. I have thought about that over the years as the funniest thing. It was so helpful to me, and I could have taken that as a terrible, criticism, and I just knew she was right, and I have to go back and redo it. And someone who's resilient can move from being a victim to being a survivor. Back to the captive woman, us, all of us here who are truly victimized in this world situation we're in, but we can be survivors and we can thrive. Next, Matthew. This is another children's, some of you may have seen this or know it, riddle. In which direction, and children, kindergarten children know it immediately. In which direction is the bus traveling? The only possible answers are left or right. So, Matthew, can you get that?
I'm not sure.
In which direction is the bus traveling? Anybody? We all have to go back to kindergarten. If you're in this country, you know that it's traveling left, right? Because if it was traveling right, there would be a door here. There would be a door on this side of the road. Children know that the school bus door is on the other side. If we were in the UK, traffic travels in the opposite direction. But the correct answer here is that the bus is going left. It is so hard for us to figure that out. And again, that goes back to our fixed way of seeing things rather than just being open. Okay, next, Matthew. These are some of the factors that inhibit healthy functioning and emotional resilience. So if you see in the middle, that's a healthy emotional functioning, resilience. And the things that impact it are isolation, what we're doing right now. Actually, I say that what we're doing right now is reaching out and being in this meeting. That's a sign of resilience. We're here. The fact that all of you could call in, be here, participate, make time, that's a sign of resilience. So, what interferes with resilience are stressors, overstimulation. If we're watching the news all the time, you can become so confused and overstimulated and depressed. Uh, poor insulation. Poor insulation would be um, very similar to that, that the news just bombards you. And so these factors, stressors, isolation, they impact a person's capacity for resilience. What helps resilience is being able to regulate stimulation, right? So to be able to lower the emotional temperature, the ability to know when to step back from something, just as an example. Flexibility, as we've been talking about, the ability to not have to see things through tunnel vision, to be able to look at things from different perspectives. A capacity for emotional insulation, to know when it's good for you to say, I need some time alone, just as an example. Or today, a contractor was yelling at me. And I said, I think you're yelling at me. And he screamed, I am not yelling. I said, I can't hear you when you're yelling. He slowed down and he started talking. So that was helping to insulate him as well as me, because I was getting bombarded. And collaboration. We do this with patients, we do this with our children, we do with our partners. Collaboration when we work together to either solve a problem, to understand what the other person is thinking or feeling about. Those are the traits, some of the traits that help us to be resilient and demonstrate healthy functioning. Next, Matthew. This Lucy, 5 cents. The doctorial is in. Chuck, I've come to the conclusion that you're so miserable because you're a bald 6-year-old. So poor Chuck, does he have to have realistic expectations and goals, but he knows what to do. We saw from before that he knows if you're going to get the most out of a bad situation, lean into it, just figure it out, right? Next, Matthew. Okay, this is important. As soon as an alternative idea to a problem is generated, even if it's not going to be successful, the idea that a solution exists in any situation increases enormously. This is something that Ellen Langer studied, that and other people, that what we see is that once a person feels like, I just can't do it, there's no way, I'm stumped. If they can be helped to figure it out themselves, some part of a problem, for some reason, that has an impact on our brain. And it means the next time, even in that same situation, even if it didn't succeed, but the next time a problem comes up, the person has a sense that something can happen and that they can do it. And that's one of the reasons that collaboration as a tool for helping somebody build resilience is really important, because you can, as you help them explore what are options and they come up with them, it tells their mind, their brain, these things are possible. And as soon as that clicks, there's a possibility. People become more apt to be able to find alternatives in other situations. Next, Matthew. I had. Okay. So some techniques for promoting personal resilience. Adopt a resilience-informed mindset. And that's what we've been talking about, or what I've been talking about today, is how to think about resilience. In my research with the mental health professionals and educators, they had 2 interviews. And in the first interview, I asked them, so what about this idea about resilience? Is it something you've thought about? And people say, no. And I said, well, if somebody said, are you a resilient person? Would they say yes? And they would say, I don't know, I probably, but I struggle with different things. So in this interview, I asked, could you tell me a story about something that was really difficult for you to do, something that was a challenge and maybe didn't go so well. One of the worst things that ever happened. So all these people told me stories, and as they would tell the stories, I would find places within the story where I could say something like, that was an interesting solution. Or even in a time of real struggle, you were able to find something, your mind could be resilient and you figured this out. And we'll go through these stories of totally really tough stories, but things. I'm thinking one person who is a hospice worker and talking about one case that was so painful for them to be involved with. And he had created a type of imagery that he did with this patient who died that day. And the imagery was to take him on a trip to a place where the patient and his wife used to go, that they had visualizing it. So I said to him something about that was really resilient. So fast forward to the next interview a couple of months later, and many of the people retold me the same stories. I'd say, tell me a story about something that happened in your work or in your life. Many of them just told me personal stories. And they might tell me the same story, forgetting that they had said it before. But in the second version, they were much more powerful. And you could see that now they had the idea that there was something resilient in their functioning. The seed was planted just by these simple phrases that I said. And they came back. I said, well, tell me another story. And then they would tell me another story. And the next story would be something about how they had achieved something. Right? So you see, even in this simple interaction, it is possible to help the people around you feel more resilient, feel that they have a capacity to problem solve. So having a resilience-informed mindset helps us and the people around us to be more resilient. Engage in active self-care, supervision and personal therapy. Of course, I think that that's important. Humor. So if you can laugh at yourself and the absurdities of yourself, then you can be more centered and strong. There's no question. And being able not to make fun or mock, but to just appreciate the absurdities helps us to get through. Treat interpersonal resources well. So that's take care of the people around you. Be mindful of those around you. and that helps you to maintain connections, which are completely essential for resilience. And always be curious and ready to explore. Being curious is one of the most significant traits in terms of just listening to another person, being able to know or study or figure out a problem, to just be curious without the idea that this is going to, make a return on the investment. It is just because of the pleasure of finding out and exploring. These are some of the traits. Matthew, the next one. So we made, let's see if I need to talk about this. Well, techniques for promoting resilience, they are non-intrusive and they don't challenge a person's perception. So if you're talking to somebody who says, I can't get out of this. I don't know how to get groceries, which is something that's happened to all of us probably in the past year. I'm going to starve. So you might say, you don't challenge them and say, you're not going to starve. We'll find somebody who's going to bring you food. You don't problem solve for them. You might say, wow, you mean there's nothing in the cabinet? So you don't challenge the perception. You help them to explore what are the options. Or there's nothing in the cabinet, or is there someone who could be helpful? And they're probably in that case saying nobody could help. But they're also non-intrusive, these ways of talking to people to help them become more resilient. They're not saying, well, in that same example, well, why don't you just pick up the phone and call Instacart? Or that's an intrusive question. Or why didn't you get food before? Or with the woman who can't get away from the abusive man, what are you doing with that guy anyway? Those are intrusive, ego-oriented. They assault the person. And what happens is when you ask that type of question, the person is likely to withdraw. They might feel angry or they might self-attack, but they're not likely to engage with you or with the environment in problem solving. So that blunts the resilience response. But there's another type of resilience. You can move to the next one, Matthew. Matthew. So in my research, I discovered another type of resilience called reciprocal resilience. And mainly I was studying educators and mental health professionals, medical professionals, but it applies to any situation where you're interacting with someone who has been in a disaster or traumatic situation. So reciprocal resilience is that empathy, the empathic loop that comes between two people. So you're developing, as you're listening, to the terrible stories or the complaints that a person has, and you're demonstrating the willingness to hold the feelings, to just be with the person. You're not going to give them advice or criticize them. As you said, you're just being with them and curious and holding. That helps somebody to feel centered, helps the other person to feel centered, and helps them to feel like they're valued and that they can do more. When you're doing that, when you're the person who is the holding container, and you see this happening, what happens to you is that you feel like you've done something, something is happening, you've made a connection. So this loop of resilience continues reciprocally. When two people or in a group, where when you are willing to listen and hold, rather than hold the feelings, rather than try to solve the problem for the person. It's always about finding ways that are object oriented, outside of their psyche, outside of their ego, to look at the world and themselves and solve the problem. You're supporting them. You are, and this is with parents with children. You're always modeling that interactive holding and the opportunity for reciprocity. You can go to the next one, Matthew. Next, Matthew. Oh, I'm looking at the wrong one. Sorry, no, that was the other one. Sorry, that was me. So some of the benefits of reciprocal resilience are there's a transformation in the therapist or the person, the holding container person, their inner experience that results from this, from holding on. This is a statement about therapists, but teachers' experiences, nurses' experiences, where hospice workers experience. One of the things that the reasons that I started to research this is because we question, why do people do these terrible jobs? They're not getting paid billions of dollars. They have to sit with terrible feelings all the time. They can't really talk about their work with their family because it's too painful. And so I met over and over with many, many groups, and they would tell me the difficult things of their jobs. And then I'd say, so why are you there? How about, ever think about a job change? What will keep you there? And then they would start to think about, oh, and you know, but I love my job. You can go to the next one, Matthew. And they report when they would say, I love my job. I think I'm really doing something for other people. I get another perspective on my own life when I'm listening to all these tragic stories. I'm developing, they say, a sense of hope and commitment and admiration for the people who they work with, or for the people in their congregation, in their hospice work, their kids, the kids in school. They say that they develop a different tolerance for frustration in this reciprocal process. They can think of other ways of healing, and they develop a sense of spirituality and meaningfulness. There have only been a few studies of the benefits of working with trauma cases, mine and 3 or 4 others. And the others were in South American and Central American countries where people were subjected to a lot of kidnapping, killing, and the clinicians and educators had to work with, and for example, with workers from Katrina, from the listening to all of the stories, the terrible stories of people from the hurricane. So these people found, and they say, when you are working with trauma cases, when you are in your own family, helping someone to adapt and become more resilient, you yourself have a sense that there's more to this than just what's going on here. You have another sense of that there's something spiritual in this kind of a loop, that the connectiveness, the the empathic connectedness that you have. And it creates a sense of meaning that is different, people say, from when you are just talking or, curious about another person. This occurs when you are working with people who are under extreme stress. And I think that we can, Matthew can go on to the next one, but I don't think I think we've talked about all that and had a couple of suggested readings. Many of you may know about the Adverse Childhood Experiences Studies. They just changed it yesterday to PACES, the Positive / Adverse Childhood Experiences Studies. So it's now called PACES, not ACEs. It's one of the best longitudinal studies of what the impact of adverse experiences are on development and subsequently how we can help to build resilience. Clearly showing that resilience is a process that can be built. It is not just something you're born with. Salman Akhtar writes many wonderful things. Hopelessness is that book is wonderful. And of course, you can read some of the stories in my book and some of the parts of it you probably won't want to read because it's about research. So next, Matthew. And Mark Twain. Humor's the great thing, the saving thing. The minute it crops up, all our irritation and resentment slip away and the sunny spirit takes its place. We can't live without humor. We must be able to laugh at ourselves, laugh together with other people, laugh at ourselves. And we do have that final page, but I want to open it up for questions. I think that's any questions or anything you'd like to say.
Just an invitation to type your questions in the chat. And while folks are doing that, I just really want to thank you, Dr. Bratt, for such a rich presentation. It reminded me of one of my favorite quotes that comes from Winston Churchill, which is, "Success is the ability to go from one failure to another with no loss of enthusiasm." I guess I can just say a quick question. We have a great youth group within our congregation. And I'm wondering, out of your techniques for promoting resilience, which ones would you emphasize when working with teens?
Well, I run this iStrive program for young adults on the spectrum, and they are an amazing group. I'll tell you what happened recently. We had a conference 2 weeks ago, in conference Belonging and Otherness, and debated whether to have them participate on Zoom, participate, because in the iStrive program, they do whatever they're doing. They're free to be whom they are. We have many groups and so forth, but so funny, I said, let them come and just treat them like they're other participants. And they came and they were amazing. They were the superstars of the conference. They stayed. I said they could leave at 1. They stayed till the end, and they participated in discussion groups. They were on different ones. We had a wonderful speaker, Kerry Magro, who is himself, he's in his 30s, he's on the spectrum. He was talking about navigating dating while on the spectrum. And so they interviewed him, they asked questions of other speakers, and they were terrific. Next week, the following week, we're at the iStrive meeting, and it was like mayhem. Man, there were like, everybody was saying different things. And I said, what's going on? Who are those people who were there last week? And one kid said, young man, he said, well, we had to, that was us being mature and on good behavior. We had to, we were at a professional conflict. This is iStrive. We can do whatever we want here. You know, it was such an amazing difference and such a
Awareness.
perceptual shift for them to be able, and they all started talking about that. And so with your young people, which I'm sure Matthew is included, I think that first of all, understanding what an object-oriented question is, always trying to explore, to find out what's going on with them, who are they? Not with the idea that you're going to do something, but just out of curiosity to help them and you know who they are. And to do that by asking questions that are not, don't challenge their perception. Those are some of the things that, there's another young man in the iStrive who follows conspiracy theories, and most of the people don't agree with him. But we explore it like, well, what is it about it that appeals to him? Help us to understand. And he had been very defensive about it. And you could see he calmed down and he can just talk about it. So exploring, not challenging perceptions, and being curious instead of trying to provide an answer.
Mm, that's very helpful. All right, I see that Sal has used the raised hand function.
Oh, yes.
So Sal, if you could unmute, and then our next question will come from my parents. But Sal,
No,
please.
I'm
go
sorry.
first.
I thought that by the time I got my questions typed into the chat, the program would long be over.
What? Oh, right. You're like me.
I was amazed. I've never considered myself to be resilient, but I guess I am. I thought I was just surviving. But I'm
Well, you're
curious.
here, so that's a demonstration. Otherwise,
It is.
otherwise you
Apparently,
would be-
from what I've learned tonight, it is. But I'm curious just to know, I have other people in my life who I don't consider to be resilient based on the standards. And I've often wondered, like, how to get those people or that person from A to B, how to convince them that, they can do it. How do you convince them that, you can do these things? You don't have to wait for someone to take you by the hand to do it. You can do it.
do they want to do them? That's the first thing. Is it something that
Yes.
you think they should do or want to do, or is it something they say, I would like to do that?
Yes.
They say that.
Yeah.
So then you might ask, and they say that to you, I really wish I could do that, but I just can't figure out how to do it. That's the kind of thing they would say. What would they? Yeah, give me an
Yeah,
example.
not so much that they don't know how to do it, more that, I get the sense that they feel like, their feet are glued to the ground, like you can't move from that spot.
Well, if somebody told me that, I might say, where'd the glue come from? Like, what's the glue about? In other words, what really interferes with getting where they want to go? So you'd start to explore with them. Somebody says, I really want to do this, whatever it is. I want to get a job. I want to go to college. I want to run a marathon. What does it take to do that? So just to explore. So that's an object-oriented question. It's not saying, what do you need to do? What would it take to run a marathon? No judgment, no, but to help them just articulate. Oh, well, I would have to be able to run a marathon. I'd have to get a trainer. I have to be up at 5 every morning. I can't do that because my job interferes. Oh, does everybody who runs in a marathon get up at 5 and run? Or are there other ways that people do it? So you would help them to explore what options might be. This is only if they're coming to you and saying that they want something. If it's a job, how do other people get those jobs? Has that been explored? All of these are object-oriented questions. So not saying, like, why haven't you explored that? Or have you talked to anybody? You just- Are there people around who have had those jobs? How did they get them? Always like that to help people externalize the ideas that are in their head, so then they can say something. Oh, I never really thought about that. Yeah, of course not everybody gets up at 5 o'clock in the morning to practice for the marathon. People have all different schedules. And then they start to look at things differently. I
The right
would,
side of the bus.
what?
Looking at the right side of the bus.
Yes, that's right. Right.
That was a good one.
All right, so we are
Thank you
coming,
very much for your help. It was a very great night and very informative. I appreciate it.
I'm glad you like it.
we are coming to the end of our time.
See,
But Dad, would you quickly unmute and you can ask your question.
The phrase emotional insulation is new to me. Could you give me a little bit more on that? And also I want to share a quote you inspired by the comedian Victor Borga. Laughter is the shortest distance between two people.
Yes.
And I think any parent who hasn't laughed with their kid that day blew an opportunity. But
Absolutely.
does it have anything to do with emotional insulation?
It does, because humor insulates you. Humor can be insulating because it fires off different chemicals that help you to feel more intact and safe. And the things that I've been talking about with Sal, for example, that's an example of emotional insulation. So you're helping somebody, working with somebody who is facing a difficult challenge to them, and being curious about it to help them without getting them anxious. So that's, you're insulating them, you're buffering that. With children, what can I think of with young children? If somebody says, I heard something the other day, they were standing at the door ready to go to school, and school was called off, and started having a tantrum. And the mother said, let's sit down. It was a 4-year-old. And so I feel really sad about the mother's modeling. I feel sad about the school not being open. I'm also pretty angry. It would have been fun to go to school. So now we're stuck. I'm stuck. What should I do to make today better? So the mother is using herself as the object rather than the child saying, what do you want to do today? The mother says, what am I going to do now to make today a better day? So she's modeling, she's taking responsibility, she's acknowledging the feelings that the child has. That's all insulating the child so that they don't persist in ratcheting up and becoming overstimulated in that kind of situation.
See it as a sort of a calming coating to protect you.
Right,
It
right.
gives you a sense of protection and a capacity to deal with it. So now I
Right.
get the insulation thing. I was getting insulation and isolation
Oh,
Too-
yes, yeah.
too close to each other. So, thank you.
Insulation helps protect you from overstimulation,
Yeah,
right?
and over vulnerability and
Right,
over agitation.
Helps you
Yeah,
to step back
gotcha.
so you can,
Thank you.
can
Thank you.
regroup. Right.
All right, so we have one more question. Michael, are you comfortable with unmuting and asking your question?
Well, maybe I'll just read the question since
Perfect.
that
Yeah,
I
that's
wrote.
perfect.
Okay, thank you, I appreciate it. Thank you so much for this presentation and for holding this.
You're welcome.
So I put in the chat, I think resilience can be a result, resilience can definitely be a result of life experience, of, as we were saying, of the support when we're young, and of things that can lead to us developing resilience. But my question to you, Dr. Bratt, is if you could talk about what resilience can lead to, as the resilience being the seed to something coming about in our lives. Thank you.
Well, that is the definition in a sense of resilience is, unfortunately, historically, we've only been able to study resilience in relation to overwhelming experiences or trauma, because we're not measuring resilience unless there's a conflict to, to put it up against. So what we know is that if somebody is faced with an overwhelming experience and they figure a way to get around it, we're not looking for people to, the old historical sense about resilience was that you bounce back to where you were. And that we see is not really resilient. You do recover, but resilience is using that experience to grow to something else. So if you think about the business person who fails at some venture, and then they figure out how to do that. And this is a mechanistic thing. It's how to do that in another way and keep trying at that. That would be how it could bring about positive change in life. But if you're thinking interpersonally, that let's think that somebody who has a fight with their partner. I'm thinking about a case I just saw, and it's a case where somebody has a fight with a partner, and they're able to let go of their own insistence that they know that they're right, and step back from that and understand what the other person wants and maybe why they want it, and what it means to them to get it, whatever it is. And then they find a way to compromise or go along with it. And this would lead to a different kind of a change, to go say, okay, my partner needs this, and I now understand why. So I'll do it. I really believe that the other thing is better and we'll like it more or make more from it, but I'm going to, because they need it, and do it with a good spirit. Right? To not say, I'm making this compromise, or I'm going to do this for you, you need to do this for me. To just do it with a good spirit, that I'm doing it because he or she wants that, and I want to do that. That's an example of where that person is growing, because they're able to have this interpersonal interaction that enhances their own sense of inner strength. I don't need to be right. That opens up a whole lot of opportunity. I can be my own centered self and do something for my partner just because it makes sense to them. So that reinforces your sense of inner strength and enables you to go to the next situation and figure, I can resolve this, or I don't have to be defensive just because I want something and somebody else wants something. I can look at it differently. That could make an enormous difference in a person's relationships with people. Let's say, from that one instance, all of their work relationships could change because they would not have to feel like they must, life and death, defend their position.
I think that's a great note to end on. Dr. Bratt, thank you so much for not just giving us such valuable knowledge, but for really equipping us with tools for navigating life's ups and downs. Let's end with a prayer. Reverend Phyllis, would you mind offering our closing prayer?
All right. Let's all just in community take a deep breath together. And as we join together in heart and mind, let us enfold in gratitude Dr. Bratt for bringing to our consciousness that we are indeed resilient children of God. And so I invite you to just take a moment to concentrate on one trauma and ask it what it has come to teach you. Surrender. That God's will may be made manifest in everything we think, say, and do. And so with love, strength, and the presence and power of God, we go forward, affirming God's will be done in everything we think, say, and do. Thank you, God. Thank you, God. Thank you, God. Amen and amen.
Amen. And now I would just invite everyone to please unmute and let's give Dr. Bratt a big round of applause.
Thank you. so
Thank
much.
you. Thank
Delightful.
you. Yay.
So glad I could share.
Thank
with
you. See you again.
Yes, see you again. Oh, thank you, Reverend John and Matthew, who's hidden someplace, but he was terrific, terrific help. And you were all great. Have a
You
good
were too.
evening.
Thank you for
Thank
your
you.
wonderful
It's very
insight.
helpful. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.
Bye.
Hi, Reverend John.
Bye, John. Bye,
Mm,
Phyllis.
Thank
Hi, Elaine.
you. Bye, Elaine, Ellen.
Bye, Phyllis. Have a good night, everybody.
Everybody.
Bye, John.
Mhm.
Take care, Michael.
Take care, John. Thanks so much.
All right.
God bless. Take care.
You too.
Maybe
God
I'll be able to join something in the future. I'll keep an eye on the website from time to time to see what's going on.
bless. That'll be awesome. That'll be awesome.
Yeah.
Have a great night.
Yeah. Pleasure to be a part of. Pleasure to attend this. It was really thank you. So you too. Take care.
All right.
Thanks. All right. Bye.
Take care.